We've been hearing quite a lot about data: good data, bad data, ugly data, dirty data, and the V's of data. So there's plethora of definitions related to data. But what is it? So what are we talking about? We talk about the data with the context of making human life better. And I think when we talk about data, somehow this particular key aspect is being ignored over and over again. And I'd like to emphasize that we talk about data because we want the revenues to go up or the cost to come down, or the life has to become better, sickness has to come down, customer satisfaction has to go up, and the complaints have to come down. Organizations have to become more productive, and the wastage has to come down. Human life has to become safer. Diseases have to really be combated. Adverse effect of you know uh, natural calamities have to be minimized, managed, and mitigated. And all these elements focus on making human life better. But whenever we're making decisions pertaining to data, that is the question we need to talk about. Technology, how the technologies are procured, whether it's open source, what the vendor is, how the implementation happens. I think that's all secondary to it. And somehow, in this game of finding the data related answers, it's because technology enthusiasts are driving it, and I've been a technology enthusiast, and I still am. This is somehow being marginalized when I hear the sounds again, when I see a report coming in, when we see someone talking about data. Somehow this voice is subdued, and I want to bring this voice up. That whenever we talk about data, we need to talk about what benefit will this resulting to humankind. Half of the world, for example, nowadays is using internet. We're doing 40,000 searches per second. Half of 1.5 billion people use Facebook on a daily basis. So there's a lot of data being used. Let's touch upon some of the elements. Now, if you're looking at an organizational or in an organizational context, data either can be centralized, it means it's highly controlled, or federated. I'll give an example of think of this as federated data, like having a toilet paper but not having it when you need to use it. So you have, I mean, that's the way I would put federal data, that it's kind of distributed, but it's also controlled. When you need it, it may not be available. So what's the balance? So I think the challenge usually I find that comes across as not necessarily with the federation, but the custodianship arrangement. It's not actually ownership. It's not my private data. It's if it's in an organizational context or even a private context that you hold the data, you may not necessarily be owner of the data. You might be a custodian of the data, and you'll be required to provide the data to others as a service or against a cost. So you are a custodian, not necessarily owner of the data. I think it's a matter of lingo as well. When we talk about data, the other element you need to think about is metadata. So think about, you're in a jungle, you see a lion. How do you know it's a lion? You haven't seen lion before, so you need some sort of data dictionary that tells you what are you seeing is actually a lion, it's not a cow. So the lingo has to be right. The other element is the variety of data. The data variety is actually growing in leaps and bounds. Even in, let's say, spatial data, you have hundreds of companies providing you with data. They have their own formats. It can be written from XML to proprietary formats to some open formats, and on top of it overlay with tools that can read and write in different forms. So when you're making decisions, you have to really keep that in mind, that how the process is going to be better for human beings that are going to make decisions on that. And these decisions, as I mentioned before, either to improve revenues, cut cost, improve better life, or reduce sickness, and so on. The other thing that when you're dealing with data, you have to keep in mind is the data is coming at you at a very fast pace, which we talk about velocity. When the data comes at you at a high speed, then you need to have mechanisms to harness it so that you're able to input the data, process it, analyze it, and store it or make decisions in real time or near real time. Yes, you can rely on machines to make decisions for you, but human intervention sometimes is very well needed because at certain point in time you need to keep checks and balances in place to ensure that the benefit actually flows to mankind or the organization or the purpose for which you are using the data. There are likelihood of redundancies in the data, and without going into much of detail, some of the organizations I've served, I find that on one side of the partition wall, there's a team working with data, and on the other side of the partition wall, another team is working with the data, although a little bit a different version of the same data. So you have multiple Excel sheets floating within the same organization's different version of it, and each section or department adds or appends their own attributes to the data. So when you see the intelligence of the organization collectively, it's not there, but in individual silos, the data is adding value. Now, how to bring that up, that's another topic that I'll talk about later. Then there is element of data cleaning and data standardization. It's like nobody wants to use dirty paper in the toilet. They all want clean paper, but who's gonna clean it to make it standard and usable? And I think that somehow the organizations forget. They create the data, they don't have necessarily the metadata associated with it. So a party that's going to use the data, they need to understand what they are touching, what the data is, and how that's going to be put to use. So this is a quick dossier on the data and how to use within the organizations. Thank you.